Hey, it's Jordan with the Young Turks and TYT Politics. I am here with Larry Sanders. You are the older brother of one Bernie Sanders.
That's true.
Our audience got to see you in America last year. You were at the Democratic National Convention supporting your brother.
Here is Larry Sanders.
I want to bring before this convention the names of our parents, Eli Sanders and Dorothy Glassberg Sanders. They did not have easy lives and they died young. They would be immensely proud of their son and his accomplishments. They loved him.
Democrats.
They loved the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt and would be especially proud that Bernard is renewing that vision. It is with enormous pride that I cast my vote for Bernie Sanders.
And right now, you are in the home stretch of your own campaign. You're running for MP of Oxford East over in England, and you're running on the Green Party ticket. And your campaign, from what I've researched, has very, very similar tones to what we've seen here in America in your family. Just for the layman who doesn't know, European politics, what is running for MP of Oxford East?
Well, MP is a member of parliament. It's equivalent to a congressman. They've only got a single elected house, unlike America with the House and the Senate. Oxford East is the name of the constituency. It's basically the eastern part of the city of Oxford.
Great. And you're running on the Green Party ticket. Have you always been with the Green Party, or was this new?
I've been with the Green Party for 15 years or so.
Okay, terrific. So talk to me, because looking at your campaign, I mean, it's strikingly similar. You're talking about income inequality. You're talking about healthcare issues there, poverty. Income inequality is one of your brother's main issues that he's been talking about for 40 years. Can you kind of talk about what the issues are there, how big the divide between the rich and poor is, and what you think you can do?
Well, the divide is not as big as it is in America, but by most accounts, Britain is the most unequal economy in Europe. So that's pretty bad. And the thing to do is really what Bernard has done, is to raise this to people's consciousness, because we've had it, and Bernard is right, it's been going on for 40 years. It's not just that he's been going on for 40 years. The statistics are very clear, but most of the time it's not noticed. And the fact that it hasn't been noticed, and that the politicians who are meant to be kind of on the left, more popular politicians, have not paid attention to it. And I think that's why we've got where we are now. And the kind of policies you need minimum wages, you need housing that people can afford, you need a good health service, and so on. And you need investment to create good jobs that people want to do and can do. So the solutions are not that difficult. But the political will and the capacity to win the political argument, which is what Bernard has done better than anybody, that's the big part.
So I'm curious, what have been the obstacles there? We know in America, in the 1950s and the 1960s, you had strong labor unions. Corporations couldn't funnel money endlessly to politicians. There weren't these awful trade deals. And then we saw what happened, with Reagan and then the neoliberals. What are the forces that have caused the inequality over there?
Well, I think it's precisely the same. We have an international system. The same people. In fact, the idea of dividing it up and talking about the American bankers and the British bankers and so on is silly. They're the same people, and their goals are the same. And the cultures, political cultures, are different, and there are different events, but the underlying forces, the underlying pressures, are very similar. And we can put names on them in this case because they're really essentially the Reagan-Thatcher period. They didn't do it themselves, but they were around at the start.
Mm-hmm. And healthcare is something you've been talking about quite a bit. The NHS, the NHS. You have increased deaths as a result of the cuts that have been made.
Yes.
Nearly 6.5 million people are, without people caring for
No,
them.
that's a different issue.
Okay.
Yes, but you're right. The NHS is a brilliant institution. I've had very good care from it all the time I've been here. Friends and family. There are flaws. The big problem with it is that it's easy to cut the flow of money. The government can do it very easily, and sometimes they want to do it. And in recent years, particularly the Conservative government has been doing it. And the results, it takes quite a long time before these results turn out in statistics. People suffer and so on. But we actually had last year a statistic that in 2015, there were 30,000 more deaths than were expected. So that's nothing. And the idea is that we couldn't find anything else to attribute it to other than the cuts in health and social care. Now, the 6.5 million I'm talking about is people who are looking after disabled friends and relatives. With all the baloney that goes on and all the nastiness in our societies, basically most people are looking after other people. And I'm sure it's quite the same in America. And here, the 6.5 billion is friends and relatives who've got of people who have Alzheimer's, who have long-term cancer problems that they didn't die from them, but they have problems and strokes and all the many conditions that you get as you get into your late 80s and 90s. And the number of people in those age groups has been going up very nicely, I'm glad to say. But but in the absence of help and support, that turns into a grueling process. And what's particularly sad is that people expressing their affection, their love, their loyalty are being driven to the wall. And there are so many things that can be done, and some of them have been done. The situation has gotten worse. So that's how those two things play together.
And in America, obviously, you got the corporate welfare. We have to cut education and hospitals and teachers and all that, but we can't cut the tax breaks to the rich, can't cut the subsidies to the oil companies. It seems like they've made cuts to things like the NHS, but not to the wealthy.
I think you're right. It's exactly the same pattern. And you would expect it. It's the same people for the same interests.
Right. And talk about education. Obviously, we saw your brother in America. He was villainized. Oh, pie in the sky, this free public college. You're talking about similar things, ending tuition fees, things like that.
Yes, exactly. What's even sadder here is that we had, up until, 10 or 15 years ago, we actually had fee-free higher education, universities and stuff. And not that far before that, we had maintenance grants. That is to say, that in addition to not having to pay fees, you get money to live on while you're going to doing your course. So we've had a history of it, and loads of people who are doing well now, professionals and the like, benefited from that. But the doors are being closed.
So what caused that? Was that big business coming in? Because it seems to me that you look at countries like Finland, you look at these countries that rate very high on education, they have free college.
Yes, it's I honestly don't know. I think it's not directly money, because in fact they've set up a very complex system of loans, and they won't get back a lot of those loans. So there's a tremendous amount of government cost, but everybody who's subject to it will feel desperate because they've got this debt hanging over them, even though at the end of their lives they may still have never paid it off. So the government is not doing that well out of it. It can't do much in the way of tax cutting on that. I think it's what you would call ideological. The idea that you can go through life and have a relatively easy life because there's a mutual support system based on the government is really something that a lot of people resent. And it's a kind of somebody did a lovely questionnaire just for billionaires. There aren't that many of them, so they got a high percentage, and they do have a different set of values than the bulk of people. And this idea that people shouldn't get stuff that they haven't earned, not that most of these billionaires have been out digging the streets to get started, it goes against the deep grained views.
And could you talk about the housing issue there? Because in America, obviously, we saw over the last decade, this fraudulent mortgages going out. The house of cards fell. Now you hear these stories, home equity is going back up, but they kind of leave out of that. A lot of people lost their homes. Can you kind of talk about, as part of your campaign, high housing prices?
Well, I think in some ways that was handled better here. Very, very much fewer people lost their homes. So in that sense, it was handled better. But what we have had that's almost as disastrous is a constant inflation in the cost of housing. So in Oxford now, you would have to earn, to buy a house, the cost of a house is about 20 times what your average income is. So if you're making £25,000, you have to spend £500,000. Well, it's not something that people can do. The amount of income is totally out of line with the cost of housing, and it's reflected in rented housing as well. And we don't have a system anymore of rent controls, so people are kind of thrown to the wolves. And the landlords have few restrictions on them. So rents go up steadily. The capacity for long-term leases is limited. So certainly every year, the landlords can come back for another increase. So people are very uncertain and insecure, and a very high proportion of their rents. And of course, it applies more to young people who have not gotten onto the housing ladder than to older people who usually will. By the time you're middle aged, one way or another, you will have been in it. That will not apply to the young people today. Young people today, probably in middle age, will not have good housing, and they certainly won't be owning their own houses in anything like the numbers that have happened. And of course, that's another cause of increase in inequality, because if your parents can leave you the money from a house that's gone up dramatically in value, you're all right. The guy down the street or your friend doesn't have that, is in a totally different position.
Mm-hmm. And, in America, as we saw in your brother's historic campaign, often actual progressives are up against, what I would call faux progressives, the Hillary Clintons and others. You're facing a liberal Democrat, you're facing someone from the Labor Party, conservative. I'm not going to ask you what their positions are, but why do you feel you are really offering the actual progressive change versus somebody, let's say, representing the liberal Democrats?
Well, I think probably more importantly, the Labour Party. The Liberal Democrats are a very centrist party, and they wouldn't really claim to be contesting my ground. But the Labour Party would agree to that. And what we've got in the Labour Party is we've got members of Parliament who actually do the voting and make the laws, and they came up through the Blair period. So they are basically there are always exceptions in politics, but the large bulk of them are at the best centrists. And many of the things that I've talked about are not things that they're very interested in, or if they are interested, the amounts that they're thinking about are much lower. But in the recent couple of years, we've had the emergence of Jeremy Corbyn, who is somebody who's been in Parliament a long time, never had any office. He was not highly thought of by his colleagues, which is probably a good thing for him. And he has, the Labour Party set up an election system in which the members voted rather than the parliamentary party. In the past, typically the members of Parliament have chosen their leader, and that leader then becomes the Prime Minister if they win a majority. So we don't have that. So we've got Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of the Labour Party, but the bulk of the of Labour people in Parliament don't support him, and many of them are very actively against him. So in fact, it's been a problem for the Green Party that many of our people left the Labour Party because it was going so right wing, and some of them are going back to Labour because they think Jeremy Corbyn is good, and in many ways he is good. He's not as good a speaker, and he's not as clear thinking as Bernard, but he's in many of his issues are in the same area. But the problem he faces, and I think that means that the Green Party is still vitally necessary, is that they're going in for compromises, because he has to deal in some way with this bulk of his MPs. And so we see their policies. In fact, I haven't studied, their manifesto for the election just came out today, so I haven't studied it. But up until today, for instance, the amount of money they were willing to put into the NHS, which is in really very dire straits, was about 1/5 of what's necessary. And that was based on their falling for the old idea that we can't afford it, which you will heard in America as well. So we're a coherent, cohesive, smaller, more radical party. The Labour Party is very important because it's a much larger party and has a lot of very good people in it, but it's a very split party.
And do you feel in your election, is there still that Brexit energy and sentiment that might play a factor in yours?
It's very hard to know. This area was one of the areas that voted to remain. Didn't, and I think there is some energy behind it, but it's very hard. What I have felt is that where it has been the main issue for the last few months, in recent weeks, more economic issues, more things like the NHS and so on, have been coming to the fore.
And let me ask you, outside of policy, obviously we've seen throughout Europe, like with America, this rise of xenophobia, the rise of the racial sentiment, and politicians preying on that. Obviously, we know you and the Green Party doesn't agree with that. But do you see that in your election and other elections like it?
I think in the national election, that's still part of the underlying. I don't know what the right word is, morass. In this area, I don't think we've got a lot of. We've got a lot of people from all over the world. It's a very cosmopolitan city, Oxford. So I don't think that anti-immigrant spirit is important in this election. But around the country, there undoubtedly are places in which that's significant. And the Labour Party has a lot of difficulty because some of the places in which it has a lot of support have been places which have responded to some degree or other to this anti-immigrant nonsense.
So a bigger picture question outside of just your election, but I mean, you've lived in Oxford nearly 50 years, if I'm correct. And you're a very wise young man at 82. And I'd ask, what do you think? Is Europe at a tipping point right now economically? Because I think America is. I think we're either going to make a radical change, like your brother campaigned on, or fall deeper into that pit.
There are enormous problems here, and I don't think I know enough to predict. I think the coming out of the European Union will probably be very dangerous for this country, and they haven't sorted out the issues that allowed the banks to take us over and bring the economy down have not gone away. They've not been properly regulated. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years we had another big collapse. Within Europe, the problems are very similar. The Eurozone was probably one of the great stupidities of modern mankind. It was set up in a way that it could almost certainly not really succeed. And I fear that it will come down, and that will in itself not necessarily be a great loss, but within the chaos, there is so much anger and so much fear that it's really unpredictable as to what would happen. So very bad things could happen.
And I just want to ask you one question about your brother in American politics. But obviously, in America, when he ran, the neoliberals said, "Oh, don't look at the numbers. He'll never beat Donald Trump," even though the numbers said he very clearly would. Now, after that election, he's the most popular politician in America. He's getting crowds of 5,000, 7,000 all over the country, even in Republican states. Are you not that you would be surprised, but do you think that this means that in 2018, which would be our midterms, possibly 2020, that where we failed in 2016, not winning electorally, that we're on the verge, the progressive movement?
Well, I don't even know enough to predict, but I think what Bernard has done is historic, and we haven't had that. Although the Jeremy Corbyn thing was helpful and in a similar direction, it's not been, and he has not been able to get that kind of spirit amongst a large number of people. So I think America is very lucky that Bernard was there and that he was able to rise to the occasion. So without predicting elections, which are very important, but they're not the whole story. I think Bernard's idea of the political revolution, that you have to fight for the issues that you believe in. And if a lot of people do it and keep it up long enough, then you're on the right track. but it's a very dangerous world.
Your election is June 8th. How can viewers find out more, support you? Where do they go?
Oh, that's a very good question. I never, my capacity for understanding media, social media is very limited. I think if they look up my name, Larry, but you have to add stuff to it because we've got a very famous basketball player and that famous television program. But if you do Larry Sanders, Green Party, Oxford, you'll probably find out about me.
Good, and I'll put social media information under the
Yes,
video.
and I hope there's some place on here for people to send money if they. Money is not as big an issue in British politics. On the other hand, it is a bit of an issue, and we are the poor brothers.
I'll make sure everybody has the info. Thank you very much, Larry Sanders.
Thank you very much, Jordan.
Have a good one.